A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are watching us from behalf of the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and Water Policy Center. It gives me great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished chair, Dr. Amit Gupta, speakers, and participants who registered for the event. We are so glad you could join us today at the NICE WPC International Conference on Post-Pandemic World Order, Navigating the New Normal. Throughout the 3-day conference, we will be having 30 sessions that will take place at 2 Zoom rooms simultaneously. We have around 150 experts and speakers joining us from 30 different countries who will be delivering their presentations and sharing their expertise with us. This is the 19th session of the conference. To chair and moderate this session, it is a real pleasure to have Dr. Amit Gupta here with us. Dr. Gupta is an associate professor in the USAF Air War College, Alabama. His writings have focused on arms production and weapons proliferation, South Asia and Australian security policies, diaspora politics, popular culture and politics, and more recently on the US-China rivalry and the impact of demography on US foreign policy. His articles have appeared in Orbis, Asian Survey, Security Dialogue, The Round Table, and Mediterranean Quarterly. He is also the author or editor of 7 books, the most recent of which are Air Power, The Next Generation and Maritime Heritage, and Challenges in the Indian Ocean and the Western Pacific. Without any further ado, let me request Dr. Amit to chair the session.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 5 speakers today, so let's say everybody goes for 12 to 13 minutes, and that'll leave enough time for questions. And if there are less questions, well, we can just interact as a group. So let's start with Dr. Mehmet Ozkan. I'm going to get up to the other screen so I can actually read this properly. Dr. Mehmet Ozkan, who's a senior fellow at the Center for Global Policy in Washington. His paper is Global Politics is Again Local: State Capacity, Populism, and International Cooperation. So Mehmet, please go ahead, and you've got about 12 to 15 minutes.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the organizers. I mean, it's here in the morning in New York, so early morning. We just wake up and let's see what I can share, from the early morning. So basically, my presentation consists of several things, just to talk several issues. First, if we want to understand what really happened with the pandemic here in the world politics, I think we should see one thing. History is accelerated. That's for sure, because especially in terms of technology, perhaps where we're supposed to be now in terms of use of technology in next 5 years, now we reached that level in 3-4 months. I mean, in everywhere, internet usage and everything has increased. But along with these lines, we have seen national and sub-national efforts coming to the fore again. Once more. We at the same time we don't see international effort. So in a sense, it was a good mirror to show our fault lines, especially in national and sub-national politics. So what pandemic showed us very clearly, especially if you look at the state response to the pandemic, regime type is not important. Of course, it's important, but rather than regime type, what we see state capacity. The state capacity has become much more important. In that sense, politics become again local. And we have seen, in many places, I have seen in the United States, for example, state capacity in terms of health is not that good. This country can be great in many sense, economically, politically, whatever, but state capacity is something else. And at the same time, some other countries, relatively, they are not very well, and their state capacity might be better than this place. So state capacity will be one issue we will continue. And along with state capacity, I think we should bring the issue of the state itself, especially in Latin America and Africa, because what is the role of state? What state should do, to which level state should involve. And that will be another question probably in coming years. We'll be discussing the concept of state, especially in third world countries, in non-Western countries. That brings us to another question, especially, this month, we will discuss in the United Nations, it will be a total new United Nations General Assembly, the elements of international cooperation. I think international cooperation from now on should switch more to the state capacity, establishing state capacity or increasing state capacity as well. Starting with Millennium Development Goals, I know there are broad lines and everything, but there should be more concrete on the increasing state capacity. And UN, perhaps, after this pandemic, can play a role. Let's see what will happen with the new PGA and with this September's meeting. But in a sense, we should define, international cooperation rather than like lip service in a way. I think that would be one of the key issue we should really look at this. Also, in this time we have seen the issue of populism, which is another dimension. Although populism has always has always a social base, which is powerful. Whether in the United States or Brazil or somewhere else, many of the populist states, they fail in responding this pandemic. We have seen this in Brazil very well. In the United States, it's totally failed, I think. I mean, in some other countries as well. So what we see, so we have to organize, we have to link populism in a way with the state capacity, whether this lack of state capacity or lack of badman will sort of shape the future of populism. That will be another issue we will see in coming years, probably we'll discuss. Also, we have seen one thing, very clearly with this crisis waning the US leadership. Nobody was expecting the US will act in that way. The only leadership one can see in New York, which is, after we locked down 3 months. Now it is perhaps New York is one of the safest places perhaps on the earth, I can say. I mean, but the lack of US leadership and international cooperation, of course, will make difficult for us to increase state capacity especially in non-Western countries. But that might create a room for a different understanding of South-South cooperation. Because so far, what we talk in South-South cooperation for many years, we talked about it was just only discourse. So South did not know to other South. For example, if you are in South Africa, if you want to do something with Philippines, probably all your knowledge about Philippines will come through the UK or the US. So perhaps that can create a new possibilities that really South can really know the other South countries. And then, in terms of capacity, what they can do, what they cannot do. So perhaps that might open a new chapter in terms of South-South cooperation, which hopefully, just we can have a healthy discussion and increasing each other's state capacity. And as we continue to this crisis, especially in Latin America, which I follow very closely from here, I mean, lack of state capacity has become much more clearer, and politics is local again. That's very clear in especially in Latin America. Unfortunately, each country has different cases, from Colombia to Peru to other countries. But I don't see any discussion on the issue of state, on the concept of state. When I interact with the academics there in local, they agree on these points, but none of them is discussing it because the concept of state has been defined differently because of lack of middle class, and state has been captured by an elite. So perhaps academically and politically we should continue. Otherwise, I don't think there will be any way we can go further because that will not lead us anywhere. Probably we will not understand if we don't bring these issues to the table. We will not understand the post-pandemic global politics. Although it's still not clear, we don't know how long it will continue, whether 6 months or another 1 year, or some says another 2 years. We don't know yet. But I think preliminary those are my thoughts that we have to return the local politics again, given the increasing possibility that lack of international cooperation is increasing. There is no international cooperation now. I mean, at all level. We will see when the vaccine came out. We will see how they will share. But then it forces us to act as local, to see local dynamics, and to create a new South-South dimensions, and perhaps regional and local dimensions. That will be the essence of I think new politics in near future. So I think these are the just general outline that I can say. I mean, we need new type of cooperation, especially all the international cooperation agencies from USA to UK or TICA, Turkey, or JICA from Japan. Also, for those international cooperation organization development agencies, they should redesign their projects that they finance. You know, in many countries, that's another issue for them, whether they will adapt for the post-COVID area or not, and we will see in coming years. I think preliminary, those are my thoughts, just bullet points. You know, if there is more discussion, we can go. I mean, I didn't want to go in detail, so it's better to keep it brief. And thank you very much. I'll be here for the further question and debate. Hopefully, we can exchange ideas.
Thank you, Mehmet. We'll go on to the next paper, which is Benjamin Mwadi Makengo of the School of Politics and International Studies, Central China Normal University. He's going to talk about a post-COVID-19 world, politics and conservative progressive competition, Africa in a complex dilemma. Okay, go ahead, please, Benjamin.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks so much for the kind introduction, and thank you so much, the organizer of this great event. Just like you say, like the idea, the big picture I'm gonna share with you is like to understand the conservative, progressive competition in the international arena, and to see how is a dilemma in Africa, a complex, of course, dilemma in Africa. And the first point I just want to point here is COVID-19 just came to accelerate some of the events in the international arena. And one of the most important events that COVID-19 just come to accelerate, of course, is that competition, conservative and progressive competition. And this competition, of course, is dominated by the United States and China. Is the competition of those who want to conserve their power and influence in the world, the conservative, and those who pushing for change in this current international arena, the progressive, of course, led by United States and China. That's the point of this competition. But actually, we need to look at the post-COVID world. And my point is clear. My point is that the post-COVID-19 world politics is going to be a more suspicion, more uncertainty, more competition, and more clear divided world. You know, already COVID-19 increased the competition between United States and China. And the post-COVID-19, of course, because of this increasing in this competition, it's going to be more uncertain and suspicion between those two blocks. And of course, it will be a clear, a divided world. And we will know already actually what United States want and what also China want. But this competition is happening in so many areas in the world. And of course, Africa is not exception. This competition was also happening actually in Africa. But I'm looking here in the post-COVID-19 world in Africa. And if you look at since the year 2000, China is increasing its engagement in Africa. And of course, if we are talking about Africa, just we are thinking about the raw material, right? We are thinking about the ally, 54 ally of African countries. And also we are thinking about African market. And of course, China actually is the main partner of the African country, and China more focused in the economy. And the West, the conservative, of course, they are still controlling African politics. And you can see how the election is happening in Africa. And in the post-COVID-19 world, it will be a complex dilemma in Africa. Because of course, Africa will just be in the middle, and the conservative in one side and the progressive also in another side. And sometimes some scholars, they are asking questions, who Africa will choose? Do Africa need to choose one side against another side? We need to choose the progressive or the conservative. And of course, we know very well the Africa politics is in the hand of the conservative, the West power. And China is more focused in economy. And that is a complex dilemma in Africa. And that dilemma is will be more complex because, of course, the conservative, they want to conserve their power and influence in Africa. And China also pushing for change. And that the reason why the African country, Africa, should be aware about this situation and to think actually how to balance those two powers. And of course, to manage very well this situation and for it also to win. And in this competition that is increasing in the world, and that will be increasing in the post-COVID-19 world. And I think we can discuss more in the question like moment and debate. That it will be nice. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Benjamin. All right, we'll get on to our third speaker. Our third speaker is Ararat Kostanian from the Oriental Studies Institute at the National Academy of Science of Armenia. He's going to talk on the multilateral world and international relations. So Ararat, please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Yes, we can.
Hello, dear colleagues. Thank you for the invitation. Previous to coming to the post-pandemic issue, I would like to precisely talk about the evolution of multicultural and multilateral world that had been shaped in all last decades very quickly. I believe that the multilateral world started to be seen and started to get active after the financial crisis that happened in the United States and affected the whole world and the whole region in itself, the Western world and Eurasia, Europe, and Asia, of course. But in that period, China started to feel motivated in advancing its economy. And we have seen in this last 10 years or 5 years precisely that China became not only economic power, but already advanced its military and already started to show to the world its civilization base as well. In terms of Confucianism and in terms of social with Chinese characteristics. On the other hand, of course, another important aspect which showed us clearly that there is multilateral world, not only US hegemony is efficient after the collapse of the Soviet Union, was the war in Syria, where we've seen clearly the Russian involvement, besides the Syrian government supporting Iran as well. And that bloc already, although China didn't enter the war, but it supported the Syrian government at United Nations, many times putting veto, and showed financial support to the Syrian government as well. So these two options that I've talked to these two realities showed that clearly that there is multilateral world. The West, precisely the United States, no more is the police of the world and no more has the ability and the capability to impose its hegemony all over the world. And here it comes, the trade war between China and United States, as we know, the issue with the technologies and the Huawei issue, and later comes the 5G and etc. So the Hong Kong issue as well, the protests which were supported diplomatically and by media through the United States and its allies, and we have seen they couldn't put pressure on China's advancement. So here it comes, the coronavirus, and we saw clearly that China, although started this issue in Wuhan in China, but very quickly Chinese and other, of course, Asian countries such as South Korea and Taiwan and the rest, they were very reluctant, and they showed their discipline and how to solve this problem very quickly. Although the problem is not gone forever, we are still having this issue globally, but in comparison between the multilateral world in international relations, precisely this bloc, I call it China, Russia, in Middle East, Iran, they've been able to show that there is no anymore the American imposed idea that the US is the most civilized and US is more advanced country in the world. And we have seen Russia and China who've been from the first countries who started to send aid to other countries. Even if we remember the incident in Italy when it started to be devastating, and EU was not able to help Italy, and first aid by planes came from Russia. And so from this taking point, I believe that the competition will be not tougher as it was during the Cold War between the Soviet Union and United States and its allies, because this time the West and especially the United States is facing problems in itself, as we have seen and as we are seeing now, the clashes on the streets, and after the killing of the Black American person and the demonstrations taking place in US. Moreover, before the coronavirus issue, we have seen for more than 7 months demonstrations in France, which is that we know as yellow velvet demonstrations. So this time the West, I think, will not be capable to compete with China, Russia, Iran, and in Islamic world also with Syria and other countries as well, which is supporting this line and which is fed up with the American imposed wars and imposed rules. I believe the West needs to look at itself. The West needs whether a new ideology or civilizational new methods to compete with not only with Asian awakening, but also with this bloc that I'm calling it a multilateral world. I believe that West, if precisely the US, if they want to be winner in this Cold War, I mean, they have to they have to go to their basics and they have to revise their values, because today in US, I see that they don't have any value, rather the economic advancement which they had, and they don't have it anymore like used to be. So I believe that when Russia has the ideology of Eurasianism as an the basis Orthodox Christianity, one factor. China has the Confucianism as a religion. In Islamic world, Iran is having the Shia revolutionary ideology. Turkey is having the notion of bringing back the values of Ottoman Empire and etc. So if you compare all this, and if you see the developing world, developing countries, how they are going back to their ideologies, you can see very clearly that the West is all alone in this field. And I believe if they can revive the Catholicism, or if can join Catholicism with modernity, I believe that the West can still be in competition. Otherwise, we will not only see the decline of the West, but we will see the isolation of United States from the world arena.
Okay, Ararat, thank you very much. I will pass it on to the next speaker. Fourth speaker is Sanjay Pulipaka, who is going to talk, who's from the Delhi Policy Group, and he's going to talk about COVID-19 and the international order. So Sanjay, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Amit Gupta. Let me at the outset thank Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, for this invitation to speak on post-pandemic world order, navigating new normal. I'm happy to share this session with speakers, chair, and more specifically with Dr. Mehmet Ozkan. He has contributed a fine chapter to a book on values in foreign policy, which I co-edited recently. Coming back to the theme of my presentation on COVID-19 and world order, where do we start? To understand international politics, the neo-realists suggest that we take nation states as primary units of analysis, and the relationship between these nation states is defined by anarchy. And anarchy, in turn, defines or modulates the state's behavior, prompting them to adopt self-help strategies. If we understand the impact of COVID-19 on the international system, then we have to study through the variables that I just mentioned. Let us take the nation state, for instance, to start with. Nation state is back with a bang in the recent past. In the past 6 months, we has reiterated the importance of nation states in response to pandemic. There has been actually very little discussion on the role of private sector or the importance of civil society or letting market have a free run to contain the pandemic. It was only the state apparatus that was constantly interrogated for its response or lack of it with reference to the pandemic. The rigorous interrogation of the state apparatus points to the growing relevance of state both within and without. There has been exponential increase of state power when dealing with pandemic, lockdowns, economic stimulus packages, declaring curfews. The might of the state was in full display in all parts of the world. Either new legislations were enacted or old legislations were dusted from library shelves and brought to life to empower states in their fight against the coronavirus. Developing countries, even those which were not good at deploying technologies, have learned the art of deploying large-scale digital operations. Many governments will continue to do this even after the end of the pandemic. A related question that Mehmet also mentioned was, what role did the characteristics of nation states play in responding to coronavirus? There is no clear evidence to pronounce judgments as to whether democratic system or authoritarian system have fared better. While authoritarian regimes may claim victory in battling the virus, many democracies such as South Korea and Japan and others have also performed relatively well. An important challenge for a comparative study is that the authoritarian regimes, the data is quite suspect. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the inherent efficiencies and dangers associated with large authoritarian political systems, which deliberately limit the exchange of information. On the other hand, probably it is easier to identify and report an outbreak in a democracy much faster than an autocracy. Tomorrow, when the vaccine will get rolled out, or in the next few months, the modalities for administering the vaccine will be decided by the governments. Of course, private sector may produce these medicines, but the first recipients and the modalities of delivering medicine will be predominantly determined by the state apparatus. Related to state apparatus is the notion of sovereignty. Sovereignty has come into discussion back again. There has been a discussion that it's not merely the rights of the states, but the obligations of the states should also be taken into account. For instance, what should the international organizations do if they perceive a nation state is not adequately providing information pertaining to pandemics? However, where do we draw the line in terms of letting international community determine the response of state apparatus in various other sectors? Sovereignty cannot be so fluid that it evaporates very quickly. In the coming months and years, we will see renewed debate about sovereignty and its limits. An important feature, as I mentioned earlier, was the presence of anarchy. As we all know, it refers to absence of centralized authority in international system. The realists argue that anarchy makes genuine cooperation difficult and pushes states to indulge in self-help. On the other hand, there are those who argue that cooperation is possible even in the midst of anarchy. Even in anarchy, there is an international society which celebrates norms of cooperation. During the initial stage of COVID, when it was still perceived to be an epidemic localized in China, the international community demonstrated cooperative impulse and generosity by rushing in large medical and other forms of assistance to China, which has been adequately documented. As the ferocity of the COVID-19 became evident, nation states switched to more rigorous self-help. Medical supplies, equipment, pharma products were either hoarded or there was a rush to procure them to meet current and future requirements. World Health Organization, which was supposed to facilitate cooperation in health sector, stood thoroughly discredited. Other multilateral institutions have also failed. If we pause for a while and look at the international landscape, we will struggle to find multilateral frameworks that instilled confidence in people by addressing with great alacrity the challenge of pandemic. Of course, there were countries, whether it is India, Japan, or others, to a large extent, it was a nation state on their own, and self-help was the principle. All this indicates that the pre-COVID world order has been strengthened after the pandemic. What do I mean by that statement? The relevance of nation state has not only been reiterated, but it has grown. The international system is defined by anarchy, but the pandemic has not resulted in strengthening of international organization or multilateral institutions. On the other hand, the limitations of these multilateral frameworks have been demonstrated visibly. It has become evident that world order is witnessing more of self-help when a critical crisis like a pandemic emerges. However, if we examine the impact of the pandemic on power shifts and modes of engagement, then we will see many new developments. The most common question that is being asked today is whether the United States is in a state of permanent decline. That is a question that I've heard from my childhood. Probably that question was raised 4 decades ago. The decline of, in my opinion, it is still too early to indulge in such predictions. As Ruchir Sharma notes, the United States is battle-tested survivor of 12 recessions, a Great Depression over the last century, and its share of nominal GDP stands at 25%, same as it was in 1980. In the economic realm, China might find it difficult to sustain its earlier growth rates. If companies do move out, to ensure resilience of supply chains, then the future investments will find greener pastures in Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, or even Bangladesh, and possibly India. However, if China's economic crisis does worsen, India's immediate neighborhood countries such as Nepal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, which have been receiving investments, may witness a decline in investments. Globally, unless there is a radical advancement from the US, whether it is to somehow reignite the TPP process or create a series of FTAs with various countries, China will remain a dominant player in the region, at least for the next 10 years. The security dynamic in Asia has been impacted by the standoff between India and China. The immediate neighborhood around China has started acquiring, which was already the case, but the scale of intensity of defense acquisitions has increased. The power differentials between China and some of its neighbors, such as Japan or Vietnam, will start witnessing shifts sometime soon, which may constrain space for Chinese military actions. The international system will see the rise of other nations, and therefore there will be demands for greater multipolarity in the international system. There is considerable demands for international system will generate friction because the existing decision makers have relatively less pressing security threats to reform the institutions. In contrast, the claimants for the seat at that high table have immediate tangible benefit from being part of the global institutions and their decision-making process. To conclude, as I pointed out, the elements of the world order, whether it is nation states, anarchical nature of the international system, or self-help, will continue to retain their importance after the pandemic. However, changes in terms of balance of power and the demand for reforming international institutions will gain in all probability. In all probability, Asia is going to be much more multipolar space. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. All right, we'll go on to our last speaker. That is Jyotsna Mehra, who is at St. Antony's College at Oxford. And she's going to talk about the Indo-Pacific in the post-COVID-19 international order. So Jyotsna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm a graduate from St. Antony's, but now I'm in Delhi. I work at the Ministry of External Affairs. But just at the outset, these are obviously my own personal views and not that of the ministry. I would like to thank our hosts for inviting me to speak on the topic and congratulate them for organizing what is indeed a very timely discussion. So the conference talks about imagining a post-pandemic world order, but from here in India, it seems like the pandemic is still very much here. But certain trends are emerging which are making it quite evident, especially on what I'm going to talk about, the Indo-Pacific, that we are going towards a very definite direction. At this point, I think it'll be useful to take that step back and see where we were at the start of this year, 2020, when Qasem Soleimani was killed, and the chatter in policy circles was that this could lead to the decline of the Indo-Pacific strategy because the US will again get involved in a volatile West Asia. But 8 months hence, and we see that the Indo-Pacific is still very much there and everyone is talking about it. And it's only gathering more momentum, and there's more willingness and not less to do something about what is seen as the China question in Asia. So while there may be uncertainties about the near future, so in the strategic space, there's certainty about growing convergence between India, the US, Australia, Japan, and some of the Southeast Asian states, France, about the Indo-Pacific. And that's not to say that there wasn't convergence before. So certain things have helped bring the Indo-Pacific countries closer together during the pandemic. Of course, it was like it was pointed out earlier, that the virus had its origins in China, and it revealed the limitations of a large autocratic state system when it comes to a cover-up, when it comes to the spread of the virus to other countries. And then we had the issue of the contamination of the World Health Organization. We had what's called the mask diplomacy, where China was already in Feb and March going out and supplying medical and humanitarian assistance to other countries that were in need. There were controversies surrounding it. that were to do with the quality of the product supplied, just the publicity of the project altogether. We had the wolf warrior diplomats coming out on Twitter, retweeting anonymous accounts called Lizard King and such, saying that the virus in fact had its origins in the United States or in Italy, trying to change and rewrite the history of the pandemic. And in fact, juxtaposition China, which was then emerging out of the pandemic, or at least that is what was the impression outside, against what was going on in the West, which was reeling with the pandemic at the time. This is April, May. And then we saw that all the fronts remained quite hot during the pandemic. South China Sea, we had only over the weekend Philippines coming and saying that changing its stance on China and saying that if China continues to carry out drills near the Spratlys, the Philippines will call the United States. We had Vietnam also experienced some disturbances near the Spratlys. Malaysia issued diplomatic notes to the UN, reaffirming its stance on the South China Sea. Taiwan, of course, gained a lot of traction during the pandemic. Just today, the senior Czech delegation was in Taipei, and I think 2 weeks ago, Taiwan opened its representative office in Somaliland. At track 2 level, there's far greater interaction happening between Taiwanese sides and sides here in India or in the United States. US, in fact, conducted its very first high-level meeting, first high-level visit to Taiwan after decades. There's a lot of talk about a Taiwan-US FTA going on in policy circles in the US. There was of course there were disturbances in Japan, near Japan as well, in the East China Sea. Over 100 overflights near the Senkaku Islands. And in India, of course, as was already discussed, we had the standoff at the line of actual control. There were several Chinese apps that were banned, and a consolidation of public sentiment in India very firmly against China. This is something that we've also seen in Australia. Reasons for that are, of course, beyond the pandemic. The trade war, mini trade war between Australia and between China over beef and barley, when Australia said that they would support an inquiry into the origins of the virus, it was threatened with tariffs on its exports to China. Then there was foreign interference keeps coming up in Australia. Recently, a politician from the New South Wales Assembly was arrested over charges of espionage, assumably for China. When it comes to the US, there were sanctions on Chinese officials for activities in South China Sea, for Xinjiang, for Hong Kong. We had the consulate in Houston being closed and vice versa in Chengdu. There were cases of spies being arrested. These were visiting academics and military officials. So there was a lot going on, which in fact helped consolidate these countries' positions on the Indo-Pacific even further. We've been seeing at an individual level, for example, in India, where India has been carrying out its own mask diplomacy in its neighborhood. In the Indian Ocean region, we had Indian medical teams visit island states in the Indian Ocean region. Medical supplies were sent to Comoros and other islands in the Indian Ocean region, and of course in South Asia. And then the Quad is set to meet again at a high level soon. There's a talk, at least in the Indian media, about Quad Plus convening, often over health cooperation. At bilateral and trilateral level, increased engagement, not just on COVID, but you see joint statements often carrying talk about cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, health cooperation. So it would not be fair to, it would be fair to say that through the pandemic and whatever has happened during these 8 months, China has helped the Indo-Pacific countries come closer together. So yeah, I think I would leave it at that for now.
All right, thank you so much, Jyotsna. Look, we have plenty of time. I'm going to sort of tie up everybody's papers and make a larger argument, perhaps. And look, this is the way you have to see this. If you had gone back to January 2020, which seems like it's a decade ago, there were three drivers in international politics. Economic globalization continued. You were also seeing the rise of power politics as the United States and China were coming at loggerheads. And the third one was the rise of populism. You know, Viktor Orban, Bolsonaro, whoever it is in Poland, you can go down the list on this. And of course, Boris Johnson, Trump, which many people saw as deglobalization. Now, along comes the pandemic. And one thing we've got to be very clear about, if you talk to epidemiologists, they all say the same thing. This is the first wave, and we're going to see successive waves of pandemics. So we may be living in this for years. We were thinking that maybe by July, August, this thing would be over. It isn't. Okay. So let me put it to you this way. What happened? What do I think is going to happen? And this ties up all your papers. One thing which was very clear, and Mehmet and Ararat and Sanjay all brought this up, is that traditional structures failed in dealing with the pandemic. And by traditional structures, states, as well as multilateral structures like WHO and the European Union. And I'll give you the example of the European Union. When Italy got into real trouble, they made emergency calls to the Berlaymont headquarters of the EU. And all they got back in response was silence. Instead, what the Italians saw was their neighbors started shutting off the trains that were coming from Italy into their country. So all this talk about European integration went out of the window. Okay? That was the failure of probably the best example of multilateralism, economic, social, cultural, political integration. Flip side is states didn't do too well either. And both Ararat and Mehmet talked about this when they talk about state capacity. You know, and Benjamin also, if I may add, if you look at Zimbabwe, at the start of the pandemic, it had 5 ventilators. South Sudan, which is the newest country on the block, had 3. And probably in both countries, one of those ventilators was on permanent reserve for the president. So you can't do much for a pandemic because all your priorities have been skewed. And I'll get back to skewed priorities in a second. On the other hand, who did well? And it's surprising. It's actually interesting that the countries that did well tended to be small, or they tended to be run by women. And you look at who did well. Taiwan under Tsai Ing-wen has done very well. New Zealand under Jacinda Ardern has done very well. Finland under Sanna Marin has done very well. And of course, Germany under Angela Merkel, though the Germans would say it's not so much Merkel, it's that they had great state capacity, to get back to Mehmet's point. And I should point out one thing. In the United States, the response to COVID has been political because we're in an election year. In New Zealand, it's also an election year, but such is the strength of the New Zealand government, such is the strength of New Zealand civil society, and such as the personal leadership of Jacinda Ardern, that they've been actually able to do things that other countries have not. And I'll say this about all these women leaders. Firstly, they didn't put their egos online. They went and asked for scientific advice. Secondly, they all took hard choices. And this is why in these countries, the pandemic has been better controlled than in, let's say, a charismatic leadership like Brazil or Boris Johnson, who I think is a buffoon. I mean, let's be very clear about that one. This was the guy who thought COVID was a joke. This was the guy who didn't want to fund the national health system in Britain. And then he ended up in the ICU, and he's a born again.
Professor Gupta, we cannot hear you. I think there is a problem with the mic or something.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yes, yes.
Okay, could you hear me from the beginning, or was I completely blank? No. Could you hear me when I started?
Yeah, we heard some part of it, but that's fine. Just continue. That's fine. That's fine.
We lost you when you said Boris
I'll
Johnson.
continue. Yeah, Boris Johnson's a buffoon. Keep that one in mind. You know, let's and you know, I will add one more thing there. I mean, I'm deeply. It's the tragedy of history, perhaps, that had the pandemic happened in November 2019, Jeremy Corbyn would have been running Britain and Bernie Sanders would have been the presidential candidate in the United States, because they were both talking about a comprehensive healthcare system. Okay, now to get back to the point though, you have the COVAX initiative, 172 countries funding 9 vaccines. And those 172 countries got together because what they said was, we want an equitable distribution of the vaccine. And keep this in mind. It's not the Chinese, it's not the Americans, it's not the Russians, as some of you have said. It's everybody else. We are seeing true multilateral order in terms of COVID prevention. And the last thing I want to say on the present is, there have been unsung heroes in this. And the best example of this is Cuba. You know, when the Italians and the Spanish, who had a major crisis, could not get assistance, it was the Cubans who sent medical brigades. And they have a long history of doing this to places like Venezuela and so on. So keep that in mind. So where is the future? And I'll finish that very quickly in about 5 minutes. Number one, this idea that somehow we're going every man for himself, deglobalize, so on, I don't buy that. Long time ago, an old friend of mine, Benjamin Barber, wrote an article called Jihad versus McWorld, which I'm sure most of you have read, in which he made the argument that a scientific imperative will bring the world together, or one of the reasons. And if you look at it in COVID, there has been large-scale international cooperation on vaccines. So AstraZeneca is working with Oxford Laboratories and the Serum Institute in Pune. And Oxford Laboratories says, oh, we've already decided to give the patent to the Serum Institute in Pune. There's nothing altruistic about that. The Indians actually have the capacity to make vaccines because they're the largest manufacturers of vaccines in the world. It would be efficient, okay? So this is the first thing you've got to keep in mind, that what you're going to see is greater cooperation as opposed to lesser cooperation. Second thing is, as we move into a COVID world order or a post-COVID world order, and I'll leave it to you guys to determine that, what becomes interesting is who will provide leadership within it. And my argument is the person who can come up, or the state that can come up with an alternative vision for world order, is the one that is going to triumph, or the one that is going to succeed. And that alternative vision for world order has to rest on 2 things. One, an understanding of demography. Because remember this, Europe is getting old, Japan is getting old, Korea, Taiwan are getting old, Australia, the United States are getting old. Old people require medical care. And you are going to have to change resource allocation in these countries to match these healthcare needs. The second thing, which none of you have talked about, but let me throw it in the mix here, is that COVID has also impacted the young. Because as we've moved from physical presence in the workplace, in education, to a virtual presence, it's very clear there's a digital divide. Now, you look at a city like New York. New York went online with its high schools and primary schools. 40% of children in New York do not have access to a computer or an internet at home. And look around all your countries and you can make the same comparison. So, I've been saying this now for some time. Healthcare is a human right, but increasingly a laptop is a human right. How are you going to prepare for benefiting the younger generation in this system? And essentially, we are going to have to start talking about creating a better healthcare system and a better education system. All right. Now, let me come to two more points and I'll finish this. One, don't count the Americans out, don't count the Chinese out. Sanjay is right, but by the way, Sanjay, I should point out Richard Sharma is a money manager. So I'd be a bit skeptical about what he writes on. The Chinese have developed a virus. The Chinese have talked, as Benjamin said, about giving it to poor countries in the world. And I'm not one of those people who gets into name calling and calling it China virus, Wuhan virus, so on. I think the mistake the Chinese made, which should have been brought out here, was their lack of transparency. They should have sent the DNA of the virus out within a couple of weeks. It took them till late March. And that's why the international efforts to combat the virus were delayed. Okay? But how the Chinese deal with it once they have a working vaccine will be very interesting. Because there's a large number of countries in the world who may or may not be able to afford the vaccine or have access to the vaccine. And lastly, let me end by saying one thing. I spent the first 20 years of my career working on great power politics, militarization, all this stuff. I find that stuff very boring now. But what I think is interesting is around the world, we are seeing at the grassroots level, among the 214 countries that are members of FIFA, the Federation of International Football Associations, we are seeing responses for the creation of a different world order, a world order that has social justice, a world order that has economic justice, a world order that has healthcare justice, a world order that has educational justice. And I'll just give you some idea of this. Some of the people that I've mentioned today, just understand how they're going to shape the world and how long they're going to live. Jacinda Ardern is 39. New Zealanders live to be in the mid-80s, so she'll be alive till 2065. Sanna Marin is 34. Finns live to be 85, 87. She'll be alive till 2070. Malala, who talks about global education for women, is 21, 22. She's an Afghan. She'll probably live to be 80. She'll be alive for another 60 years, which is 2080. And finally, let me end with my favorite, Greta Toonberg, who has been talking about environmental justice for the last 3 or 4 years. She's a 16-year-old girl. Swedes live to be 85. She'll be alive till 2090, which is 70 years from now. What I want all of you to do is do the mental math and see how many of you will be alive in 2090, given your current age. I certainly will not. The world that is coming is not the world of the Cold War, state strength, anarchy, all this international relations theory stuff. The world that is coming is going to be determined by the needs of people. And, to go back to those of you who talked of state capacity, good states will be the ones who can address this and who can pump their money into it. Keep this in mind, guys. All around the world, we haven't had a debate on national budgets post-COVID. That's coming. And in those national budgets, we'll be talking about healthcare. All right, thank you. I've sort of covered all your papers. Let's get to the questions. Suvranshu Pan has asked a question, how India's position will be affected in South Asian Forum after the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that one's probably Sanjay and Jyotsna. Would you like to take a crack at that?
Where is the question, please? I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out where the question. Or if you can repeat it, please, if you don't mind.
It's in the Zoom group chat.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, it's in the Zoom group chat and it's the first question. And it's from Suvranshu.
Yeah, a couple of dynamics that have come into play in terms of COVID-19 and South Asia. One, the Indian Prime Minister organized, if you know, the digital forum for discussing the COVID-19 response. That's institutional, largely institutional approach. And then in terms of medical supplies and other things, the amount of medical supplies that India pumped into countries such as Maldives is phenomenal. And recently we have been in discussions with Bangladesh as well on sharing the possibilities of vaccine and what are the modalities through which we will share those. So that is the other dimension that we are talking about. We did have some challenges in terms of
Sanjay, there's a lag on your microphone. I'll tell you what, just see if you can fix it, reboot and log in. Let Jyotsna give her views on this instead for about a couple of minutes. Thank you.
So in addition to the conference that was organized for the SAARC countries, I think that was our first COVID diplomacy initiative. And we pledged US dollars, $10 million for the COVID-19 emergency fund for SAARC countries. There was also an information exchange platform which was developed just for the member states of the SAARC. Apart from that, we've also seen just during the pandemic and beyond sort of providing medical assistance to neighborhood countries that I already mentioned, we recently had the oil spill just off Mauritius. So India sent some technical equipment on board an IAF aircraft to supplement some ongoing oil spill containment efforts. So I think that those kinds of responsibilities India is still very much cognizant of. Of course, being in the position that it will continue to face problems in its neighborhood when it comes to great power dynamics. Those are there to stay. We saw the foreign secretary going to Bangladesh following, that was his first visit after during the pandemic. So India will face competition from other powers in its neighborhood, but that is not to say that India will not respond to that, which we've seen India do already during the pandemic.
Thank you. Sanjay, are you back on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you fine. I think the connection's better. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate Jyotsna Mehra's points that she mentioned. One, institutionally, we are working again on SAARC basis in terms of strengthening, and SAARC COVID fund has been constituted. Two, there has been fairly large aid that has been provided to smaller countries, whether it is ventilators or supplying medical equipment. In case of Maldives, we are airlifting passengers and treating them in India. With Bangladesh, we are talking about what to do with vaccine. As you pointed out, just as the way China is going to be judged on the basis of how the vaccine is going to be distributed. Similarly, if the Serum Institute vaccine gets approved, South Asia will look to India as to how it is going to respond in terms of distributing the vaccine. So those are the broad dynamics. Of course, on the political segment, there have been problems with, for instance, Nepal on the release of new maps and other things. But on the developmental side, the things have been progressing pretty smoothly. Of course, with Pakistan as a member of South Asia or cooperation, things stand where they are in terms of hostility.
Okay, thank you. The second question says, how do you look at India and America's handling of COVID-19. Why don't we give some of the other panelists a chance to talk about the American side, and then the two of you can come back and talk about India if you like. So Mehmet and Ararat and Benjamin, would you like to address this? And I'll let any one of you go first.
Let me start. I mean, if you will, just on how America responded to COVID. I think, as you mentioned, it has been extremely politicized because of the year of elections. I think Trump initially started bad, but then recovered a little bit and then lost the control totally. And I'm not saying that the other side is suggesting better, especially even the mask become a symbol. Imagine, whether you put the mask, you don't put the mask. It become a symbol. I could not see. One cannot imagine this type of discussion in the United States. But the more you see here, the more you see domestic things. You feel like you live in a third world country. That small things can become extremely politicized and then unbelievable. So let's see what will happen in the elections. You can see some people here, they are saying they don't want to wear the masks. But I mean, I think Trump didn't show a good leadership in that sense. Neither, I mean, nor Biden as well. I should say in both sides. But institutions could not take it over as well. So let's see what will happen. The only bet is that they get the vaccine as soon as possible. So if they get the vaccine if Trump gets the vaccine before the election, probably he will win the elections. That's what he's trying to do. So that's all their focus. I mean, in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo showed a very good leadership here. But then, for the first time, perhaps, everybody knew him in the national stage, even at global stage. But the other side, especially in the South, is really terrible. I mean, I have never seen such a country, such a first world country, after coming here and now living here. But let's see what will happen. But as I said, I mean, this is the crisis. That exactly I refer to state capacity. You mentioned education, you mentioned health. This is even the United States. Now you see the police violence against African Americans and everything. These are all, United States needs a restructuring of the state, reorganizing of the state structure. So whether they can do or not, if they do, and I think probably that will be another state, probably they will not be able to do it. But that is the issue. That showed all the weakness of the state and state structure, education, health, police, racism, and all other types, especially with the Trump leadership. So let's see what will happen, after November.
Okay, thank you. And as somebody who lives south of the Mason-Dixon line, I couldn't agree more with the geographic divide in America on the response to the virus. But that's a different story. Anyway, Ararat, would you like to comment?
Yes. I agree, of course, with Mr. Mehmet Ozkan in terms of that there should be some structural changes. But I believe what the US is facing today is more than just a problem of institutional systems. I believe that USA today and in the past, after George W. Bush, it started to decline in terms of if previously they were holding the American hegemony or American exceptionalism by waging wars and forcing people with their troops to convey on American rules. But today, after Obama and especially during Trump, and if you look at the opposition side, Hillary and Biden, I'm surprised sometimes at how come the United States that we have known and we have read and we have seen with all their Harvard and Columbia and all those institutions, they can bring to power such an Hollywood role models, and that's why even when I was lately in Malaysia and Indonesia, when I was talking with people, they are making fun of Trump, they are making fun of America, like, who is this guy, And what this makes, I believe that this in those countries that American involvement is real, otherwise economically or militarily, people start, especially in Asia and especially in Middle East, to look at the United States a bit, that is this the United States that we know, and is this the United States that we heard of, or we've seen before as the most civilized country and the most advanced country technologically and etc. I mean, today you open the TV and you see gangsters shooting at each other, and this, you know, this is I call it a rubbish superpower, and I don't think that this I don't believe that some renovations in the system will bring the United States to its position that it has been in all these decades after the Cold War. I remember when Soviet Union tried to bring some reform in the system, although it was economic problem, but that drove the Soviet Union to collapse, and that started from Brezhnev to Gorbachev. I think the United States, of course, it will not disappear from the international relations arena and in world politics, but I see that no one taking serious United States anymore, especially when China is advancing, especially when Russia is advancing militarily, and especially when I've read an article on Bloomberg that scientific and technological institutions already are more powerful than the ones in United States. So if China is capable of surpassing American scientific and AI technologies, so I don't think the United States has something to show or to prove in this coming 20 or 30 decades. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just say one thing very quickly. The United States still has economic capacity. The United States still has educational capacity, and it still has technological capacity. Of the top 500 universities in the world, 134 are American, 66 are Chinese, okay? And 15 years ago, only 9 were Chinese. And there's a lot of talk coming out of India, but there's only one Indian university which makes the top 500, and that's the Indian Institute of Science. No Nehru University, no IIT. So, you know, you need to, I think the issue in America is not so much capability or advancement. The issue in America is inequality. Okay, but so I think I would tailor it that way. Benjamin, would you like to comment? Benjamin, are you there? Okay, I think Benjamin can't hear us. Let's go on to the next question then, which is, how will COVID-19 impact the world order? Will there be a new world order or a China-dominated world order, or will there be no change? Would any of you like to take this one?
Can I get the question again, please?
Okay. The question is,
how will... I have some question, right? I need to
you're back.
hear some idea of I have a question.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Benjamin.
Yeah.
Benjamin, are you there? Can you hear me?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Benjamin, do you have Zoom group chat? Look in the group chat, it's the second question. That will be easier than my repeating it constantly.
Can you repeat the? Yeah. Can you repeat the question, please?
I've repeated it twice. Read the Zoom group chat, please. You don't have group chat? Okay, I'm going to repeat the question a third time. Let's see if you hear it. How will COVID-19 impact world order? Will there be a new world order? China, let me finish. A China-dominated world order, or will there be no change?
No, I have it. I'm looking now.
Oh, good. Okay. While you're looking up, let Mehmet talk. Mehmet, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, look, in terms, I think what we will see probably, you guys know better in Asia, we will see, we will talk more about China from now on. That's one thing, that's one thing that in all aspects, economically, politically, China's mistake in terms of transparency, in terms of virus and whatever, we'll talk about China, more about China. So all the focus. Now I see more even Washington, D.C., people more are talking about the Uyghur issues and other different issues in China. So that will be more come to front.
Yeah.
But But the other issue here, the issue here, as China, as we will talk about China, I think there will be a decentralized perspective on China, because China has already divided everybody in terms of through its bilateral relations, economically or otherwise, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East. So or alternatively. So we'll talk about, so in that sense, I think that we will see more a niche type of cooperation. I think we will have a turbulence time in a way, because everybody's afraid of each other. Even your best ally could be tomorrow can be your enemy, on one issue. So it's like extremely dynamic situation. So I think we will say different word at least in coming 10 years, and then we will see what happens. Because the problem for this, there is no value-based approach. You don't see, before we used to talk about Western values that could be internationalized or whatever, but now you don't see that. It's already lost. The more pragmatist than anyone else. In all sense. Niche-based corporations, and people will see how they can benefit from the situation. And perhaps after that, hopefully, if we don't go to a global war, which is also another possibility, we should never neglect that. If I'm sure people might have a regional, local-based some little wars. We see now in Eastern Mediterranean, the Cold War in Mediterranean now, and we might see different places. Horn of Africa is always hard, So I think we will see a very dynamic world politics. So every day we should follow. Even the politics process, we will see, one day they will say something, the other day they will track what they said. So I think it's for academic, for us, we should be very careful what we say as well, because next day, what we say can be totally invalid. So it's like extremely dynamic environment. So it will be interesting. So let's see what happens.
Thank you, Mehmet. Couldn't agree more. Benjamin, would you like to comment now? Benjamin? There you are. Please go ahead. Benjamin, the floor is yours if you'd like to comment, please.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. We can all hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. My point is that how COVID-19 and just I'm saying that you see, COVID-19 is impacting world politics. This is true, and if we want to understand it very well, we need to take all dimension. And if we focus by economic dimension, we need to go back to the past, looking for the crisis in 2008. You know, the economical financial crisis that hit the world in 2008, and that also impact already the world order in that time. And actually, also the economy and the finance is also collapsing with this COVID-19. Just if you look at that, China, United States, the West power, and China GDP growth, you can see how it's impacting. And if you compare it with the financial economical crisis of 2008, and then you can see actually how COVID is impacting world order. And if we want to say that China is going to dominate the world, I think this is not really like the very possible scenario. We need to think also in other scenario. But my point is that the world is going to be more complex than the before COVID-19. And of course, United States will still be there, like the dominant power. But of course, with this COVID-19, if you look at the GDP growth of United States and also with other Western power, is the GDP growth is more than of China. Because in the second chapter, you can see the recovering of Chinese economy, but the West, of course, since now the economy is collapsing, and that will affect, of course, the new world order that we are talking actually, because in this area, the area we are living now, economic dimension is actually the most important one, because most of the country now, most of the area, we are focused now about economy, how we can cover our economy. And of course, the country will like cover like so quickly, and then that country will affect with or share like idea and in the world. But my point is that China is not going to dominate the world, but we are going in a world that the power of the West will be reduced with this COVID-19. And I don't think so. It will be quite a bipolar world, like in the Cold War area between United States and Soviet Union. It will be much different than that area. But we are going in an area that the Western power is going to be reduced. And of course, the East power, of course, China and others, East country, India and other countries, their power is going to increase. And that how the world will look like, and that the world order it will look like with this COVID-19. But I have also a question with to ask the Indian scholar. My question is, if we look at Africa, China is increasing its engagement in Africa, and of course, the Western power, United States and other Western power, they are trying to contain China engagement in Africa. And I want to know about India idea. How India think about increasing engagement in Africa. India will go with the Western power to contain China in Africa, or India will try or to work with China and to cooperate with the African country. I want to know some of the idea of the India scholar about India engagement in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Jyotsna, would you like to talk about the Indian perception of a Chinese-dominated world order, COVID-19, and then give Sanjay a chance? And also, could you please address the India-Africa link that Benjamin is talking about?
Sure. I'll start with Benjamin's question on Africa. So India and Japan together have what is called the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, where they promote quality infrastructure in Africa. And apart from that, we've seen a greater Indian diplomatic presence in Africa over the last 5 to 6 years, consulates and high commissions, embassies. We have greater defense engagements with Africa, particularly with East African countries. Africa is a continent which is very important to India, also because of presence of Indian diaspora there. So wherever there's Indian diaspora, which is pretty much everywhere in the world, Indian interests naturally are rooted there. When it comes to, I think it is too soon to write an obituary for the US-led rules-based order in favor of an emerging Chinese power-based order. Like I pointed out in my own presentation, that countries have been resisting attempts to say Chinese assertiveness and aggression. Chinese assertiveness, I would also argue, is quite natural. It's realism 101. China found a strategic opportunity in the crisis and tried to get hold of it. Also, when it comes to middle powers like India, we have also been emphasizing that multilateral organizations need reforms. We've taken up the position of the WHO Executive Board Chair now, and that is very much at the center of our agenda. We'll also be next year taking up our position in the UNSC non-permanent seat. And over there as well, if you look at some of the speeches which were given by our External Affairs Minister and our Foreign Secretary, reforms in the multilateral order are important for India. And like I pointed out earlier, the 4 Quad countries have been convening increasingly since 2017, but also during the pandemic. These countries form 25% of the world's population and GDP. So they still hold a significant share of global weight and power. And Indo-Pacific is the region where the global weight, economic weight is shifting. There are Chinese attempts to prevent that region from being as networked as it has been, even though China has benefited from this being an interconnected region. But countries like India and ASEAN member states and US and Australia have been resisting attempts to create a power-based order in this region. And when people say that this looks at what's going on from a Cold War mentality, they forget that countries like India have been, in fact, resisting the Belt and Road Initiative before anyone in the West even woke up to its dangers.
All right. Hey, thank you, Jyotsna. Sanjay?
Yeah, thank you. First on Africa, I mean, I'm going to repeat what Jyotsna just said in terms of our engagement. It is scaling up. The only thing that I would like to add is we are also working with African countries on energy sector in terms of International Solar Alliance and trying to promote alternative energy sources in Africa, technologies in Africa. That is something that we have been doing, and it has been quite a success in that sense. The other thing is on Eastern African coast, we have been engaging a lot, and there is, of course, within BRICS, we have India-South Africa cooperative framework that is also getting evolved. Is there a scope for greater engagement? Yes, definitely there is scope for greater engagement. Do we see Africa in terms of Chinese Africa or versus US Western Africa? No, we are not taking that perspective. We are not in that game at this moment at all. On the contrary, as Jyotsna pointed out, we are working with many like-minded countries to operationalize various connectivity projects and other developmental activities, overseas developmental activities, and also giving fairly large number of capacity building and high-tech programs. I mean, if you look at the scale of African people coming from Africa, technology, bureaucratic professionals getting trained in India under high-tech, it's fairly large numbers that are coming. On the issue of China-led international order, I don't think we in India are looking at it favorably, in the sense that we don't see it on the horizon at the moment, because China is going to be interrogated more from now on because of the way COVID has evolved. There is, the way we understand, there is more suspicion on the streets of many countries towards the COVID-related discussions that are going on, and greater suspicion, disappointment rather, with the Chinese response. It won't be one country-led international order, as we pointed out. It is going to be multipolar. As Mehmet, Ozkan, Dr. Ozkan pointed out, it is going to be functional cooperation. Even there, it is going to be divided along coalitions that are going to emerge on various platforms. That is going to be the way forward for India and others, whether it is Quad, Quad Plus, or whether it is trilaterals that are emerging. The fact that India, Russia, Japan trilateral has been proposed by Foreign Secretary in the recent past is another dynamic that is going to play out in terms of defining the international order. I'll stop there, and if there are any other things that you want me to take on, like Indian state response to COVID, but I think we can, I leave that to the chair.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. Just quick question. Did you ask a question about China's bubble economy? Or is that one of the participants?
It's a question that is, yeah, that's a question that was addressed to me.
Okay, all right then. We'll get back to that, because Ararat wants to say something about this. Ararat, please go ahead.
Yes. I don't believe that China will be the only superpower, leading power in international relations. Actually, I don't believe that there is any one superpower is able to rule the world. Of course, the new world order that Kissinger orchestrated, it finished already, and we are on the verge of creating new world order which will not be dominated by the United States. But I want to mention something, that if we realize, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday the foreign minister of China started a visit to EU countries, and he met with Macron. And he will meet as well other European leaders. I mean, if we look to hold this China's Rise and China's Dream and One Belt, One Road initiative, actually, I believe that this initiative, one of the aspects of isolating the US from Europe, because if we take into consideration the route which comes from China and goes to Europe, and vice versa, the new technologies and Western, if we can say brackets, democracy that China also needs to improve and to grow, because I don't believe that Chinese can continue long with this authoritarian regime that they had all these years. I'm not criticizing, but I know that Chinese also authority and society they need some kind of more democratization, but not the democratization that Americans are imposing on them in all these years. But what I want to say about US declining issue, that's one of our colleagues have mentioned that he has listened to that during childhood, from childhood, and etc. But I'm not the one that I'm creating this notion. Samuel Huntington talked about that. Noam Chomsky is talking about that for decades. Cornel West is talking about it today, and others, of course. There are many people who are talking that American decline will be a reality. Of course, I'm not a politician. We are academics now. I'm not trying to blackmail or talk against American policies and etc. But if we look to the reality that what we are seeing now, China is growing economically. China is also growing in Asia in sense of Asian awakening as well, in sense of civilizational commodities with other Asian countries in terms of culture, in terms of morality. I mean, they are, even though Malays, Indonesians or Thais, they are different in race, but they have the Indians as well. At the end, they are Asians, and they have many aspects, many similarities. Even though Mehmet also can join me in this conversation, he's from Turkey, I'm from Armenia. We have also many common issues that we can share, not only together, but with Chinese also. When we sit at table, we eat, we have these rituals, you know, we have these weddings, we have these engagements, importance in this part of Asia as well, which in Europe and in US, there is no such importance. You can just have small cocktail and invite just few close friends and it's done, you know. So another issue also, which is very important, that China is not interfering in internal affairs of countries. China is simply putting the rules of economic new rules that, how can I say easily? I'm selling the product in very reliable cost, and you can get the quality that other advanced Western countries can provide. But they are not interfering in internal affairs of countries. They are not bringing their military bases around continents and around countries. They are not bringing they are not forcing you to accept their socialism and their Confucianism, you know. So if I'm a human being now, if I'm thinking, okay, if China is a global power and my country, for example, or other countries would ally with them, okay, they are assertive in their prices and in their norms, but they are not interfering in your internal affairs, and they are not imposing you regime changes and etc. So I believe that at last China, of course, will not be the only superpower, but here also Russia is very important, because in this multilateral world now, Russia and China, they are together in this battle and struggle against the United States. But in future, I don't know if history will repeat itself again, because we remember that China sided away from Soviet Union, and they opened, they normalized relations with US, and they started the open market strategy. Now it's early to say. I don't see any signs, but in the future, we don't know if Asia awakening will be very strong, if India will join China in this whole Asia awakening issue. I don't think Europeans and even Russians will be happy of Asian awakening, because we know in all these years, Asian and Western competition has created the world that we are living. So if Russia changes the balance in future and comes closer to the Western world, I think the decline of China will start, but that is too early to say from now. Thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody's had a chance to comment on this. Let's move to the last question, which was asked to Sanjay. But again, Anybody else wants to add to this, please go ahead. And you can read it. It says, Sanjay, sir, since 1990, we have also heard about China's bubble economy. What are the indicators that China's economy will have impact in post-COVID-19? I think what they're basically saying is, how will the Chinese economy look in a post-COVID-19 situation? And then it says, is it possible that, or how is it possible that the US, Brazil, India, Russia have highest number of COVID-19 cases? Sanjay, please go ahead, and then whoever else wants to chime in, go ahead.
Thank you. First, I don't believe, I mean, it is true. For 4 decades, we heard about the alleged decline of United States. And for 2 decades, we've been hearing about the coming collapse of China. I mean, it's not going to happen. I don't believe that the Chinese economy is going to have a massive collapse in the near future. It is experiencing growth slowdown, which is very different from having a collapse. There are couple of major problems that China has and the economy has, but in my opinion, I'll flag 2 for the moment. One is industrial overcapacities. It has fairly huge industrial overcapacities, and it is trying to export the industrial overcapacities. It is precisely at that moment that you are having trade frictions. So China will have to make some tough calls on how to resolve these twin issues of industrial overcapacities and trade frictions that are coming into play. And that is going to define the growth trajectory of China in the coming months and years. The growth slowdown will have an impact on the regional economies, including Southeast Asia, which also means even though India may not be directly linked with same intensity with Chinese economy as some of the Southeast Asians have been linked to, but nonetheless, we will also experience certain tremors of growing slowdown in China if it picks up momentum. We are also dependent on China in terms of advanced pharma ingredients and the two-wheeler components that we import from China. So the Chinese growth slowdown will also have an impact on India. In terms of why do some countries are having, I mean, for instance, it was asked, US, Brazil, India, Russia have highest number of cases, COVID cases. It could be possible that we are testing more. It could be possible that the reporting is much more open and transparent. But if you see the fatality rate in India is exceptionally low, which tells you that the testing and the fatality rate ratios in India are qualitatively different compared across the world. So you should not merely see when we want to judge how the COVID is being spreading across, you should also look at the fatality rates. That's where you will see a lot of difference, especially in case of India, it's very, very low compared to global average. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Would somebody else like to add to this? I'll take that as a no. In that case, I'm going to say a couple of things very quickly. And look, I'm sharing something on the screen, if I can get it up. One participant can share at a time. Okay, application window. There we go. Can you guys see this slide? Can you see the slide I just put up?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. Look, if you look at that, those numbers are from August of 2019, and they are, I mean, I have another set of slides from March, but I can't find them on this computer. They're on my other computer. Look, there's 2 things which are important there. One, everybody is talking about the decline of America. Look at how much money is invested in American treasury bills. And the United States is paying about 0.25% interest or even less than that on those treasury bills. You don't put trillions of dollars into an economy which you think is failing. That's point number 1. Point number 2, and this is, you know, there is a guy called Venugopal. in the IFS who told me I didn't know what I was talking about because the Chinese don't have the money. And if you look at that data, that's from the US Treasury Department, so I'm not making it up. As you can see, the Chinese have $1 trillion in US Treasury bills. Hong Kong has another 200 billion. So you put that together, the Chinese are still the largest holders of American public debt. China is not going away. China is very powerful. And I do want to point out one more thing there. India has 162 billion. Belgium is higher up with 217 billion. Cayman Islands with 236 and Luxembourg with 244 billion. Luxembourg is 500,000 people. That makes it basically 5% of the national capital region of Delhi in terms of population. Belgium is 10 million people, it's half the population. When you look at the global financial system, you have to look at who the players are. And you have to see the centrality of the Chinese role in this today. And I will tell you this, when you talk US-China trade, when you talk all this trade dispute that's going on, the Chinese have made it very clear that one of the things they want to do is to have the freedom to invest more in the United States. And if you look at where they're investing, they are not doing what I call the low-hanging fruit investment, which is New York and California. They are going everywhere. They are going everywhere. They're also, in terms of soft power, they've set up Confucius Institutes throughout the United States. In the state of Alabama, we have 3 Confucius Institutes. And whenever I go to New Delhi, I tell this to people, I say, if you ever wanted to put your money down, you would put your money down to set up a Gandhi Center in Harvard or in Berkeley. The Chinese have set up 150 across the country. Do not underestimate the Chinese. Sanjay, you're right. For the last 25 years, people have been saying the Chinese economy will fail. At some stage, you have to give up this notion. And the third thing is, the future of the world is going to be based on 5G. And the Chinese shot themselves in the foot on this one when they did Galwan. Because till Galwan, they had a possibility of getting into the Indian 5G network. Now they don't. And as I keep telling the Chinese, this is the mistake you made. 1.4 billion Chinese, 1.3 billion Indians, that's 2.7 billion people on a Huawei 5G. You won the 5G war. Now you've got to scramble for people. And the Chinese are ecstatic that they've got Italy for 5G, they may get Germany. Germany plus Italy combined is 150 million people, which is less than the population of Uttar Pradesh. You know? This is what you have to look at. You can be aggressive in your diplomacy, but then you pay for it in economic investments and so on. But we are going to see a multipolar world. We are going to see a China. You know, I would put it at that. All right. Does anybody else want to say anything in this? No. Does anybody have a question for anybody else on the panel? No. All right. Great. Thank you very much. I thought it was a great panel. Thank you for bringing your insights. Take care. And I shall see you somewhere at some conference in the future. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Gupta,
Yes, Ararat.
I have one question to you.
Okay.
The whole time you were talking about the countries' relation together, countries, superpowers, but this during this coronavirus issue, we are facing some organizations, NGOs, and individuals that they are being more active, or in some cases more beneficial rather than countries. For example, people are a lot talking about open society, George Soros society, Bill Gates vaccine projects, and so on. My question to you and to my colleagues also, how real is these players in international relations and in this international world policy? I mean, we know that countries and political parties, countries, foreign ministries engage in such activities. But now we are seeing individuals, they are playing, they are entering in this game, and they have big capacity and they have big finance. So how you see this issue really in the future of world policy?
Look, I'm going to say one thing and then I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. I shouldn't be the one doing the conversation here. Look, I think this world will continue to be globally connected. It's going to be globally connected through ideas, not so much economics. If you look at all the writing that comes out of America on this, it's about, oh, we're going to have economic connections. Ford has set up factories in 40 countries around the world. That's not globalization. Globalization is the globalization of ideas, you know?
Yes.
And all of you've talked about the globalization of ideas, market economies, norm-based international order, so on. But there is a new globalization coming. And again, my favorite teenager in the world is Greta Toonberg, who went on Facebook and said, I'm concerned about the environment. I want school children to walk out of class to protest bad environmental policies by every country in the world. 4 million children walked out of school at Ararat.
Yes.
And this young woman last year addressed both houses of Congress and the United Nations on environmental issues. And let me say this, Boris Johnson, who, as you know, I disdain, Father Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, Xi Jinping, Narendra Modi, Bolsonaro, Trump, do not have the same authority as Greta Toonberg when it comes to talking about the environment. And Trump fights with a 16-year-old child. Now,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say here is, in this globalized world of ideas, great power status doesn't matter. CEPI was set up with the Norwegians. Norway is a population of, 4.5 million people. Think how small that country is, but a country of big ideas. And what I see in a COVID world, a post-COVID world, is it may be a country like Armenia which comes out with the next big idea. So do not discount the small countries. Do not obsess over power politics. And one more thing, the more money you spend on defense, the more you're condemning your people to backwardness and to poor healthcare. I mean, to the Indian participants, now you've put 30,000 troops on the border with the Chinese and the economy is in recession. Wait and see what happens in 2021 when the lack of revenues begin to show. I really think there is a sea change coming. And remember this, the debate isn't taking place right now. Just as when you had World War I, World War II, there was no political debate. Think of this as World War III. And in this World War III, there is no political debate about where do we allocate state resources. But one thing I guarantee you, Ararat, is in Armenia today, more and more intellectuals, bureaucrats, government politicians are saying, how do we deal with this in the long term? How do we care about our people? Because in this globalized world, we all know the name of Jacinda Ardern. Yes. We all know the name of Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan. And I'll say one more thing. Throw out all this stuff that democracies deal with this stuff well. One of the most effective countries in dealing with COVID has been Vietnam, which actually went through a fairly long phase when they didn't have COVID cases. So I would say we all have to learn from each other. And serious people in countries are going to form these epistemic communities, these scientific communities, and come together and talk about global good. And you are in Europe. Ask yourself how many European countries are going to be buying guns and tanks and fighter jets in the next 10 years. My own feeling is very few. Because the median age of Italians is 50, the median age of Germans is 47, and I can go down the list on this. And the German population is declining, the Italian population is declining. The median age of Greeks is 51. You know, they're a very old country.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Professor,
that is it.
I like this optimism that you have. I mean, but I'm not an optimist on these issues, you know, which is fine, and hopefully that will happen. But we will see. You know, unfortunately, I think we should not take the small example as big example. You know, small waves does not create big waves in the oceans. Unfortunately, that's the so it. I mean, as someone who lived in Nordic countries, you know, at one point in life, and you know, I know they're internal, they're different issues. But anyway, we will see what will happen. But the problem here, we lost the meta theories. There is no meta theory now. If you don't have a meta theory, then it's difficult to unite the different. Then each nation, they look inward and their little things. And in each country also, I'm not talking about globally, also in many domestic countries, you know, many countries internally, there is no meta theory. Each country is now redefining their role in global politics, regional politics. You know India much better than, I mean, myself, you know, I spent some time in India as well. I mean, I've seen the vibrant discussions from all segments of society. So this is like in each country that we are experiencing. We are defining, then we need some meta theories. I think we need some time to get that point, and hopefully we can see it. I also, we should not understand, deconstruction is not a construction. You know what, the girl from Norway, and they are deconstructing something. They are just showing the weakness of the system, which is fine, which is a contribution I really appreciate. But deconstruction usually does not lead deconstruction. So let's say I'm not that optimistic as you, but I wish I were, but let's see what will happen. Just I want to make a note on this. Okay, thank you very much for this panel, for all of you participation.
I'll end by saying this. The older I get, I'm becoming two things. I'm becoming more and more optimistic, and I'm becoming more and more of a socialist. You know? So I don't do market-based economies. I never did. But you know, to answer your question, absolutely. Look, you deal with Europe, okay? Notice how many countries in Europe are breaking up. And my next book, which I'm organizing right now, is called How to Get a Civilized Divorce, State Breaking in the 21st Century. Because, you know, all the writing is on nationalism, national identity, and creating states. But if you look at it, in the 20th century, there were 3 cases of peaceful state breakup. Number one was Norway and Sweden. And since you've lived with the moral champions of the world, you know what I'm talking about. Second one was Malaysia and Singapore, where the Malaysians kicked the Singaporeans out. And to this day, the Singaporeans said, thank you, Malaysia, because otherwise they would have been in the same economic basket as the Malaysians. And the third was the Czechs and the Slovaks. But that had something to do with Czech politics, and that had a lot to do with the EU, you know. But we are going to see more examples. Catalonia, Scotland, Flanders and Wallonia. How will these breakups take place? So you're right, the meta theories have gone out of the window. And this is the opportunity for people to blend meta theory with public policy, come up with new theories and so on. And, you know, I am not dismissive of deconstructing old ideas, because it's after you deconstruct old ideas that new ideas come. In the United States today, the idea remains, if we keep giving tax cuts, the economy will boom. This is sort of the Chicago economic school. It's gone. It's gone. It's a failed economic theory. So let's see what comes up next. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. We're 1 minute short of closing this. Take care. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Have a great day.
Distinguished Chair, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of the session, I take great honor in proposing the vote of thanks on behalf of NICE to all those who have graced us with their presence and contributed their parts to make this event a resounding success. We would like to express our profuse gratitude and sincere thanks to Dr. Amit Gupta for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all the speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such a comprehensive and convincing presentation. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, I must also mention a deep sense of appreciation for the audience who have participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live on our YouTube channel. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making the session productive with your questions. We are truly honored to have had all of you with us this evening and hope to stay connected with you in the future as well. It's really been a pleasure. Also, do join us for our next session. Thank you so much.